Now our week 1 overview for chapter 2 begins. It includes business drivers for information security policies. Let's look at the learning objectives for chapter 2 and the key concepts. The main learning objective is to recognize the relationship between business drivers and information system security, ISS policies. The key concepts: business drivers for ISS policy. What drives from a business point of view what policies you have, okay? And then compliance with policy and controls. Companies that don't have strict compliance usually have serious problems with breaches. Then you have risk exposure to mitigation. You want to limit that exposure. Then you have organizational liability. What liability does the company have if they don't have a sound policy system? And the policies for operational consistency. Everything in operations, you want consistency, like quality control issues. You want the same thing coming offline at each time. The next question is, why are business drivers important? Let's give some examples from this slide. You have Target Corporation. They suffered a major data breach during 2013 holiday shipping season, for example. The breach put financial information of 40 million customers at risk. I no longer have a Target card myself because of that. Cost incurred to the company or companies involved reached upwards of $200 million. Next, let's go to British Airways. In 2018, the attacker injected malicious code into an insecure website, capturing customers' personal and payment data. The breach impacted 500,000 customers. Think of that, 500,000 customers. In addition to direct damage, British Airways faced fines based on the General Data Protection Regulation, or otherwise known as GDPR, of $230 million US. Lastly, Capital One. I have one of their cards. I think they have fixed their problems for the most part. In 2019, they experienced a large data breach in which an attacker gained access to more than 100 million accounts and credit card applications. In addition to direct damage, caused substantial harm to the company's reputation. Page 2 of why are business drivers important? Let's look at the first one. Organizations are increasingly concerned with how information risk are managed and reduced. Secondly, security policies are not considered solely a technology issue anymore. Organizations expect security policies to reflect how they want information handled. And lastly, an organization's security policies taken collectively show its commitment to protect information, which is a big plus when you're trying to ward off any bad public relations issues. And then you got basic concerns, the cost, the regulation, the adoption, the impact on ability of business to serve their customers. That's why we address security policies. Maintaining compliance. Companies that have compliance in any area and they're consistent with it betters that organization. Compliance requires proper security controls. Make your security policies relevant to business needs. They stand a better chance of being followed, because if people feel that it's important, they will do it. You have to sell them on it. Okay, they have to understand it. And then you got security controls, enforce information security policies. Physical control. Some physical device that prevents or deters access, for example, a locked door, a camera, an electric fence, and a security guard. Physical control, as the name implies, this refers to some physical device that prevents or deters access. I just gave you those examples. Administrative control, also known as procedural control, relies on a human to take some action. Some examples are providing security awareness training or having a manager check an employee's work. Technical control. Software that creates a logical control, examples passwords, antivirus software, dedicated firewall. IT people are no different than anything else. They have a tendency to let things slide when they're not convenient. So you have to make your passwords, your antivirus, your firewall work seamlessly without as little intrusion on you people as possible. Security control design types. First, you have preventative. Prevents incidents or breaches. Example, automated control. When something happens automatically to help prevent breaches or any kind of malware, anything like that, it increases your ability and likelihood of protection. Next is a detective. It alerts organization that an incident might have occurred. For example, intrusion detection system. I was in charge of a computer room one time, and we got back years ago under one of the Chinese attacks, and our software caught it, and it was like being in a combat zone. Buzzers were going off, and we had to react to that. Next is corrective. Limits the impact to the business by correcting the vulnerability. If you're not vulnerable, you reduce the risk. For example, backup and recovery. This is figure 2-1 that supports the slide just previous to this that shows the 3 unique security control design types. Just wanted you to see that. Mitigating risk exposure. First thing you do is you educate your employees and you drive security awareness. You have to make the training mandatory. If it's not mandatory, they don't think it's important. If it's not important enough for you to make mandatory, they blow it off. So you have to make it mandatory and enforce the training. And then when there's violations, you have to enforce what the training taught. Next is prevent loss of intellectual data. All of you have data on your servers that you cannot afford to lose. So you have to put policies and procedures in place to protect that data. Then thirdly, you protect digital assets. Fourth, secure privacy of your data. You don't want anybody messing with your data unless they're authorized to do so. And then you need to lower your risk exposure. The less exposure you get, you can't get sunburned if you don't stay out in the sun too long. Just a little example there. Thank you. Educate employees and drive security awareness. Under program implementation, you have repetition. Most employees do not deal with risk daily, so they need to be reminded. Onboarding. New employees should be told of their responsibilities immediately. Support. Leaders should provide visible support. Relevance. Rules that show awareness of the business context are more likely to be followed. And matrix. Measures the effectiveness of policies. Then you have program benefits. First is value. Policies relevant to business are more likely to be followed by the business. Common sense. Culture. Well understood and enforced security policies promote a broad risk culture. Then resiliency. Policies provide a basis for dealing with the unexpected. Prevent loss of intellectual property. Intellectual property, a term applied broadly to any company information that is thought to bring an advantage. Examples are patents, copyrights, or trademarks. You need to protect your IP through security policies and data classification. Next, labeling data and data classification. You need to label and classify IP data. You restrict your access. You only let people with authorization get to certain data. Nobody has access to everything unless they're really at a high rate and given that kind of clearance. Filter email and other communication tools for IP data. You have to educate employees on handling your IP material. In order to protect your digital assets, you have to define your security policy. You also have to define security controls. You have to inventory your digital assets so you know what you have. And you have to apply your label and to classify them. You have to enforce security controls. Security privacy of your data. Guidelines when developing policies to secure personally identifiable information. First is examine. You have to understand local, state, and federal requirements. Collaborate. You work closely with your Chief Privacy Officer, or CPO. Align. You have to coordinate privacy policies with data classification policies. Educate. You have to conduct awareness training on handling of PII data. Retain. Ensure proper controls around data retention and destruction. Then you have to limit. You have to collect only the data you need from an individual to provide the service or product. And you have to disclose. You have to fully disclose to the individual what data is being collected and how it will be used. Then you have to encrypt your data. You have to consider using encryption when storing or transmitting PII data. Security privacy data, page 2. Privacy regulations involve two important principles. First, full disclosure gives the consumer an understanding of what data is collected and how the data is used. Secondly, data encryption provides a standard for handling consumer information. We all need to lower our risk exposure. Concept of exposure relies on a calculation that estimates losses to the business in the event a risk is realized. You need a scale that allows you to measure risk against predicted business losses. Over time, you invest in people, processes, technology to lower that risk to an acceptable level. Risk appetite. Risk appetite. How much loss an organization is willing to accept in the normal course of business has a lot to do with what you're willing to do to prepare for that, like spend money. No easy way to calculate risk to the business in the event of a security breach. Some organizations calculate risk exposure in terms of security policy compliance. Minimizing liability of the organization. Separation between employer and employee. Acceptable use policies, confidentiality agreement and non-disclosure agreement, business liability insurance policy. Implementing policies to drive operational consistency. Forcing repeatable business processes across the entire organization. Conformity. Difference between mitigating and compensating controls. Policies help prevent operational deviation. Forcing repeatable business processes across the entire organization. Oversight phases are typically found when trying to achieve operational consistency. You have to manage process execution and note exceptions to standard procedures. You also have to measure volume, consistency, and quality. You have to review, periodically assess to ensure desired results are achieved. You have to track defects, errors, and incidences. Improve. You have to improve your quality continuously, like TQM, by making adjustments as needed. In implementing a waiver process, the following should be considered: independence, impact, benefits, mitigation, and approvals. Chapter 2 Summary. Business drivers for ISS policy, compliance with policy and controls, risk exposure, mitigation, organizational liability, and policies for operational consistency. People manage risk every day of their lives. They choose when to go to bed, when to wake up, what foods to eat, what route to drive their cars, and much more. Each decision has risk and rewards attached. This is no different in the business world. People face many decisions daily. They often operate with incomplete information. They are faced with critical deadlines that would be more easily met by sharing information outside policy guidelines. As you gain experience, these decisions become more instinctive. For business, it is a daily process and decisions that control risk. Policies provide guidance on how to think about risk. Policies and related controls detail how to prevent, detect, and correct errors. This landscape of controls and processes makes risk management real for every employee. Most important to encourage behavior that positively drives the organization's risk culture.